So I'm Wayne Lin. I'm a Senior Director of Product Management at Opower. And today, the topic I'm going to talk about is, it's called Power Plants versus Saving Energy. And really what we do at Opower is we use behavioral science to try to drive people to engage with their energy use and to drive behavior change. And we're doing this in an environment that's particularly a low engagement environment. So when we thought about coming here and giving a talk, we thought it was particularly relevant to all the other challenges you guys might face in trying to get people to engage with the environments or products or services you're providing. And we thought we had an interesting angle on it. For me, as I've looked at gamification and behavioral science, they also kind of overlap a lot, although the histories are different. And so if you think about gamification, it probably came about 30, 40, maybe even 50 years ago through people building video games, learning mechanisms that would drive kind of more interaction, more time on the games that people were developing. And they came up with a set of principles and frameworks to describe that. When you think about behavioral science, it came out primarily through academia with academics, psychologists, economists studying rationality and decision-making. And again, learning levers of what drives decision-making, what drives action. So when you look at the two fields, the language and the terminology used is a little bit different, but the end outcomes people are trying to drive to are very, very similar. So it might just be interesting at a gamification conference to talk about behavior change. Oh, gotcha. Okay, so with that, let me just get started. So at Opower, we're a clean tech software company, and we focus specifically on addressing energy usage, helping people understand their usage and reduce their usage. And so when we think about energy, there's a major problem with energy use today across the world. First, demand is dramatically increasing across the world. Right? Primarily in developing countries, you look at China and the amount of energy they're using year on year, it's skyrocketing. In developed countries like the US and other developed markets, there's more and more stuff for us to buy and plug into our homes, and demand, while it's not necessarily rising, is still very consistent. Secondly is that from a supply perspective, we have limited supplies of energy. You can argue with clean sources of energy, it's unlimited, but the commercialization of that still isn't necessarily at a big enough scale to solve the limitations we have on the supply side in terms of fossil fuels. Third is that, at least in the US, many developed markets, our energy grids are 100+ years old at this point. And so we have an aging infrastructure that makes it hard for us to get the energy we have and we're producing to the places where we're consuming it. And then in many developing markets, this infrastructure is not that complete. So again, if you look at China, you may have read reports about how they've built up all this wind generation, except it's actually not connected to the grid. They've built all these windmills that just sit there in the mountains, and they actually can't get the power to the cities where people actually live. And then fourth, and for me probably the most personally motivating one, is that there's severe kind of environmental degradation and resource issues around using energy the way we use it today. And so this is the problem that we at Opower are really trying to solve. And so it's not just us. I mean, there's major industries trying to solve this. So one, people are building power plants all across the world. That solves a lot of the demand problem. Second is we're learning and developing cleaner and cleaner technologies to build and provide this energy that people need, such as windmills or solar panels. But even with these things, it kind of creates interesting other problems. So solar panels, now you have distributed generation. The grid was built in a very centralized way to take big power plants and ship power. I'm a tech guy, so I think about data. Build big power plants, make energy, ship it to the place people are consuming, and this is a very distributed way, right? And also the sun doesn't shine at night, so what do you do at night with solar or if the wind isn't blowing? So these are other challenges that we face with cleaner supplies of generation. So that raised the question, well, what if we didn't use all that energy in the first place? And for me, this kind of goes back to a lecture I remember sitting in business school where the professor showed a graph of for every unit of energy that would consume out of the plug, if you look at the way, at least in the US, our grid is set up, there's essentially 10x the amount of energy that's going in at the very, very upfront. And so what I mean by 10x is, if you take a pound of coal, out of that pound, 1/10 of the pound actually results in usable energy that comes out of your plug. And so there's dramatic benefits to efficiency if we can cut back on that. But it's pretty hard to do, and we have a problem doing it. So first, in the US, roughly $30 billion a year is wasted in terms of energy use. And for me, what I mean by wasted is not us turning off our AC during the summer or going without heat in the winter where we're freezing or we're sweating, but it's just people not being conscious of how they use or being able to use more efficiently given the technologies we have today. And that $30 billion translates into roughly $20 a household a year or a month that they could save. But on the flip side, as Americans, and probably a lot of people across the world, there's a behavioral problem here, which is we're not very good at saving, right? Like we saw this with the financial crisis with people with their homes. It's just kind of an inherent human nature aspect of us is that it's hard to put off for tomorrow what you could have today. So efforts to get people to become more efficient based on financial messaging, a lot of academic research has shown hasn't actually been that effective. Second is people have tried environmental messages. So you can say, hey, here's a picture of a beautiful forest. I love trees. I love redwoods. Don't you want to protect these redwoods? By using all this energy, you're destroying the forests. You can go more extreme. You know, the environmental movement picked on polar bears for a long time, or I guess maybe not picked on them. They highlighted polar bears for a long time. And you know, polar bears are great, super cute, but it's really hard to connect these like large-scale forest, kind of ecosystem, animal survival kind of issues to my daily life and how I think about, do I turn that light off when I walk out of this room or not? Right? The magnitude of the problem is too connected. So again, there's another behavioral disconnection there. So why isn't this working? Right? We've tried environmental messages. We've tried financial messages. It seems to not be able to get the attention of people to drive them to change and pay attention. And there's a couple things. One is that there's an Accenture study that came out that said something like people spend roughly 6 minutes a year thinking about their energy use. And 6 minutes a year roughly translates into 30 seconds once a month when you get your bill. When you look at the bill, you see the number, and you kind of throw away your bill, or you pay your bill. As a matter of fact, out of that 6 minutes, probably in the course of this talk, I will have your minds focused on energy more than you will probably think about it for the rest of the year. Unless you're like me and you geek out about this stuff, and then you'll definitely think about it a lot more. So one is it's just a low interest topic. Second is it's low interest. People don't spend a lot of time. It's really boring. When you think about it, it's just not as engaging as other things you could be doing with your time. So we're at a gamification conference. There's lots of other systems out there or things you could be doing with your time if you're on the web or whatnot, right? If you're checking Facebook or Twitter, watching YouTube, watching the latest sports games. There's so many other things you would probably do before logging onto your utility website to go look at your bill or your energy consumption. Third is if you actually happen to do it, it makes no sense. This is an example of a power bill. Yeah, I don't really know quite what to say. Well, yeah, it's just really hard to interpret. And then on top of that, they use language like kilowatt hours. And what is a kilowatt hour? I don't really know what that is. And then lastly, when you think about kilowatt hours, at least in many areas of the world, it's actually pretty inexpensive. So a kilowatt hour roughly costs, on average, 11 cents across the US today. So it's actually also not that big of a financial mover for us. So that kind of brings us to the point of, so what can we do here? This seems kind of like an unsolvable problem, right? We all think we should save energy, but we don't really have the interest to do it. We don't think about it a lot. Efforts to get us to pay attention using other messaging techniques don't really seem to work. It's a boring topic, and it's not that expensive to me, which pretty much means there's zero natural engagement in this area. And so that creates a really challenging environment for you to go in and try to create a difference. So here I'll just pause a bit and basically give a quick introduction for you guys that don't know who we are as Opower. So this is a marketing slide, so I apologize for the buzzwords, but I'll read them out loud. Opower, we are a big data consumer engagement platform, and we work with some of the largest utilities across the world. More specifically, what that means is that we partner with utilities who hire us. All of our products are white labeled. I'll show some of them in a little bit so you can see what we do. They give us a stream of all their customer data and all the energy usage data that their customers have. We analyze that data, generate interesting insights to customers, and then layer on behavioral psychology and behavioral science to frame the messaging to drive people to pay attention and to make decisions in certain ways. And so that's the core of what we do. And we do this with our core mission as a company, which is to help everyone in the world save energy today. So we take these approaches and we apply it towards this energy efficiency problem. And so today we work with roughly 93 utilities across the world, across 8 countries. There's 32 million homes that we're currently working with, and we have roughly about 100 million homes worth of data residing in our systems that we can analyze and try to draw insights out of. And lastly, there's 500 of us working on this problem, and so we are actually growing very rapidly. So I'll just put in the little plug here. Our HR team told me to say this. We are hiring. We recently IPO'd, so if you're interested in an interesting challenge, come talk to me after. So I kind of framed out the problem, and so I'm going to go into what our products are and how we do this and how we make this difference. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to do a little challenge or a face-off between data insights and behavioral science versus physical power plants. And we can look at the two and see how they stack up against each other and see which is the smarter way or better way to go about solving the energy problem we have. So first, let's just start with the data side. So across most homes in the US, also in many areas of the world, you get a meter read once a year, and someone comes up to your house, looks at your meter, writes down the number, and then that goes in the billing system, and you get a bill. So that gives you 12 data points a year to build an engagement system out of, which is actually, you'll be amazed. You can actually do a lot out of just 12 data points a year, and a lot of our products work off of just this level of granularity. Increasingly, across the world, smart meters are being rolled out, which is essentially building a two-way network out of the entire energy grid. And so with this, now energy reads happen automatically. People don't have to come to your house. And every 15 minutes to hour, a data point is sent over a network directly to the utility servers. This gets us to 35,000 data points a year to read, which is about a 3,000-fold increase in the amount of granularity and amount of data that we can look at. So that's one thing we see. Second is that there's a lot of different approaches to meeting the demand challenges that we have with energy. And so the graph here, it might be hard to read if you're in the back, it just shows the range of cost for different types of energy generation. So there's coal, biomass, solar, coal, nuclear, natural gas, wind, and then you'll notice energy efficiency is on the furthest left. So we actually like to think of it as a resource, just like you can build a power plant or you could cut back on usage. And what we see is actually energy is pretty efficient, so it's something to keep in consideration. Secondly is demand, as you look at how people use energy, it doesn't happen consistently across the entire day. There's peaks and valleys, just like any other kind of consumption of a service. And so in the middle of the night, let's say 5 a.m., it's actually pretty cheap. It's probably $30, $40 a megawatt hour. During the hottest summer days, the highest peak usage, where it's 95 degrees outside, everyone's running their AC, this can easily rise up to $250, $300. Some areas in Texas it rises to over $1,000 a megawatt hour. So there's this 10x increase in price between the highest and lowest points, which creates other incentives around how you build up our energy system. So given that background, let's look at the two options. So one is we have power plants. And so there's kind of typically two styles of power plants. There are kind of baseload power plants, which you can think of as your big coal power plants that sit there. They pump out power steadily through the day, 24/7. It's hard to ramp them up and hard to ramp them down, and they just give a steady supply of energy. Secondly, there's things like this, which are peaker plants. This is a natural gas plant, which is during those highest energy use periods, they turn on and they provide kind of instant energy on a 15-minute basis into the grid to keep the grid balanced. So this is one option to meeting the energy needs we have, right? We can build more conventional and peaker plants or baseload and peaker plants. Second, we can go at it from the customer engagement side or from the customer side and get people to change their behavior. And so what we do at Opower is we have products that basically target cutting back on peak demand reductions during those to basically address that gap between high and low. We want to bring down the high part. Secondly, we have products to help reduce overall usage, which we call efficiency, so getting all points in time to come down. And third is we've realized that when you drive people to a real outcome that they care about, it results in very, very strong customer engagement and very strong interaction, and then that leads to much better customer relationships. So not only do you get benefits of not having to produce the power, but then also your customers are happier at the same time. And so when you look at that, here's an example of two of our products. On the left-hand side, this is our energy efficiency product. What you see is a report that you get in the mail and also through email, which shows you your usage relative to your neighbors. We call this social norming, and I'll go more into the details of this in a little bit. We also show you your heating usage or cooling usage in the summer relative to your neighbor's cooling usage, so you can benchmark how you actually use energy. On the right-hand side, this is how we affect peak demand, where we send very timely messages through email, SMS, and IVR, which is robocalls. And again, here we use similar messaging, but we show your peak usage relative to your neighbors, and we highlight the opportunities you have to save. using things such as loss aversion, and I'll go into what that means in a little bit. So if we go back to the power plant side and we look at what they do here to meet peak demand. So we're back to the peaker plant. It's a lot of steel and metal with fuel running into it. And this plant actually runs idle for about 350 days or 340 days a year. And it just sits there, and we all pay for it. And then there's teams of people that work there, and they're just doing drills, getting ready for the day where they might need to be turned on. So this is one option to meeting peak supply or peak demand. If you look at what we do at Opower, we use the internet, and devices you own, such as laptops, mobile phones, or we send you mail, email, other communications that we push in front of you. So that's kind of the alternative to having this big, massive plant. From a cost perspective, because this is a large piece of physical infrastructure that sits there, it costs about $200 a year, a kilowatt year, to maintain and have this ready to go. So when you need that kilowatt hour or that kilowatt to be produced, it costs you about $200 to bring it up and get it to run. On our side, because we operate as an information technology and a communications technology, it costs about $25 a year to provide this same service. And lastly, what are the impacts of running these services? So when you burn natural gas, it's much cleaner than other fuel sources, but there still are emissions. So you have carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and a number of other things that all kind of lead towards climate change. On our side, you can argue that zero emissions, right? A lot of this infrastructure is already out there. We're laying on top of the internet and other devices people already have. And then finally, on the efficiency side, all in, for every unit of energy you put in here, you get about 20 to 40% of it out as usable energy, which is pretty good. It's actually better than some other energy sources out there. On our side, you can claim that we drive 100% efficiency, because if you think about it again, if you get someone to not use at the end point, that kilowatt that you save is 100% saved, and it's something we don't have to generate. And so what I'll show here is a quick data visualization of what happens when our programs go out in the summer. So what you'll see here, as I animate it, what's happening here is during a peak event, we send emails, phone calls, and SMSs. So this is showing every single home or by block where we're making phone calls and we're sending emails and text messages. And this basically notifies people that an event is happening and that it would be great if they reduce their usage. And in that, we put a lot of our behavioral cues in there to nudge them to change their behavior. And the outcome of it is actually we see pretty wide-scale effects. So the heat map you see here is the savings, again, by that geography. Red is more savings. And what we've been able to see is we've been able to drive about a 5% reduction in peak energy usage when our programs go out. And the great thing, and what that means tangibly is 5%, we ran this with Baltimore Gas and Electric out on the East Coast last summer. 5% was the equivalent of not turning on one of those peaker plants that we showed you. So we took an entire one of those things that would have been turned on. It didn't turn on because of this pure communication and behaviorally based program. If we think about energy efficiency, we've been around for 7 years, and this shows you our cumulative savings to date. And so we recently hit 4 terawatt hours. To me, this is really exciting and interesting because when we started the company, we actually weren't sure if the effects would last. And I think when we talk about gamification systems, it's also similar. Like, how do you create long-term lasting behavior change? And we actually weren't quite sure. And 7 years in, we still see savings. So we typically drive a 1.5% to 3.5% sustained savings rate over time. And so once you start saving, you can measure this, you can add it up. And so for us, we do this between a test and a control methodology. And what that means is we've helped people save about almost $500 million off their bills, which translates to about 3 million tons of CO2 that we've taken out of the atmosphere. And lastly, from a kind of customer sentiment and satisfaction perspective, there's strong sentiment gains. And so we drive roughly a 5 to 10% improvement relative to a control group in terms of metrics such as my utility wants to help me save money, they want to help me reduce my energy use, they're a trustworthy source of information. Right? So we're creating real kind of customer benefits and customer perception differences out of our program. So when we compare these two, it's pretty clear to me that data plus behavioral science clearly wins relative to building these big power plants. And for us, it's pretty exciting. And so for the last part, I want to just dig a little bit deeper into how did we actually get this to happen? Like, what were the specific product design and design approaches we took that allowed us to create these programs that help solve the energy problem through a fairly efficient means? So as we think about design and we think about behavioral science, we think it really applies in 3 areas. 1, get my attention. 2, help me make a decision. And 3, help me follow through with an action once I've decided I want to take an action. So 1, hey designer, get my attention. I dare you to try to get my attention. And so this goes back to social norming. And this is one of the primary mechanisms we use. And this comes off a lot of behavioral psychology research that says, as social beings, we all cue off of each other to understand what is normal and what is not normal. And so what we do is we have algorithms that calculate homes that are very similar to yours, and we show you your usage in context of homes that have the same square footage, same neighborhood, same number of bedrooms, and so that, therefore, you have a very close comparison group. And what we notice is once you do that, people will trend towards the norm. So if you use more than average, because you are different to this group you are told you're similar to and you believe you're similar to, you will change your behavior and you'll drift towards it. The secondary thing, though, you can ask is, well, if you're efficient, then won't you trend towards the norm and use more? And what we've done is we've also then put a smiley face, which on the right side, you don't see it here. And the smiley face basically gives an extra nudge to users, say, actually, if you're doing better than normal, great job. You know, smiley face, gold star, keep it up. And that maintains, for those that are better than average, that maintains their efficient performance. Secondly is loss aversion. So in our peak product that I showed earlier with all the calls we were making, there's 2 ways we could say something. We could say, you know, you could save $156 by switching to peak day pricing. Or we could say, alert, you might be spending $156 more than you need to spend by not switching to peak day pricing. You're saying the same thing, but you're just reframing it, right? And so this is around loss aversion. And so this is the pain of giving up an object is greater than the joy associated with acquiring it. 3, and this is kind of a gamification approach, completion boards, right? So we want to drive you to complete, so if we show you're partially there, you're more motivated to kind of move all the way through. So second, help me make a decision. And so what we do here is social proof. So again, queuing off of each other and being social beings. This shows some recommendations of things you can do, and on our website you can mark if you'll do it or not. And so here you go in and you say, wow, 20,000 people have also done this. Maybe I should try this out. So social proof is one thing. Second is around choice architecture. So depending on how you show decisions or show options to people, you can shape the path that they choose. And so there's really 3 mechanisms here around anchoring, priming, and defaults. And I'll just show some examples. So this is one around anchoring. Actually, it's hard to see, but actually it's not showing up on the presenter, but 74 originally is highlighted, and it's pre-selected for you. So when you arrive, you're just kind of told, like, hey, 74, do you want to just hit OK and move on to the next screen? And this is for us like setting a thermostat temperature, which we have an internet-controlled thermostat similar to Nest. And so this just kind of primes you to like or anchors you on making a certain decision. Second, around priming, so if we ask you or we show you a set of decisions before you make or ask you a series of questions before you make your full decision, it can shape the way you behave or you decide. And there's a lot of psychology research and experiments around this. And so we can say, check all that apply to your household. We don't mind being a little cold in the winter. We don't mind being a little hot. It kind of puts it in someone's mind. We follow up with, what are the reasons why you want to keep your house cool? And we have all these ridiculous things on here, like I have sensitive prints and indoor agriculture and exotic pets. And you'll look at that and say, oh, I don't have those things, so I don't need to keep my house cool, right? So we've primed the user to making a certain decision by giving them a choice set. And lastly is, once we can drive people to making a decision of, yes, I want to change, how do we drive them to follow through? And so here we use things like commitments. So if you commit to a goal, you're more likely to honor it because it's now part of your self-image and it's part of who you are. So here you can hit the I'll do it button. When you hit the I'll do it button, we create a plan for you, and that plan is then played back to you because you've committed to doing it. Secondly, plan making, so going deeper on this idea. So once you've committed, we'll ask you, okay, are you going to install the thermostat? Yes. When are you going to do it? Where are you going to go buy the thing? Similar to what approaches happen with political elections, where they'll come to your door, ask you if you're going to vote for a candidate. If the person you say is their guy, they'll ask you, like, how are you going to get to the voting booth? Can we get you there? Like, they just walk you through the plan of how it's going to happen. So that's just like a quick run through of some of the things we do. So here's kind of a list of some of the different techniques you can try out. And essentially that's just kind of a quick run through. You know, we had a quick 15, 20 minutes to share the big problem we're trying to solve, some of the approaches we're taking to solve it, and then specifically the techniques in behavioral science that we're applying to solve these problems. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. And if you have questions, I'll stick around for a bit. I'm happy to find you around the conference and chat about it. Thanks.